Hello and welcome to the Cheeky Science Show. So I recently finished reading Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal, Illness, Medicine and What Matters in the End. So this is the fourth book written by Atul, but he's not just a writer, but a surgeon at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston and a professor at Harvard Medical School. And so in this book, Atul provides an honest portrayal of what it means to grow older and to die, and how much control we have over ourselves as we get older. He also delves into the viewpoint from a doctor over not just prolonging suffering or life, but to ensure quality of life. He does this by providing his own personal experience with stories from friends and patients. Now, at times, this book made me feel uncomfortable, but at others, it was heartwarming and reassuring. So I'm very glad I've read it, so I thought I'd share 5 key take-home messages that I took from the book. So firstly, understanding aging. Now, this first part of the book is where I felt most uncomfortable. As a follower of my channel, you will know that I covered the topic of aging a lot. I would describe aging as the gradual decline of cellular tissue and organ failure that increases the risk of developing diseases, including cancer, neurodegeneration, and atherosclerosis, and can ultimately result in death. But in many ways, this is a very scientific description of aging, and lacks the emotion and connection in the way that Atul describes it. You see, Atul describes aging more descriptively and more truthfully, which makes it more relatable, which kind of makes sense because we are all aging and aging affects all of us. And so Atul describes all aspects of aging, from the loss of the ability to chew, to the loss of dexterity in the hands, to the increasing decline in lung capacity, and the slowing down of bowel movements, and even the shrinking of our brains. At the age of 30, the brain is a 3-pound organ that barely fits inside the skull. By our 70s, grey matter loss leaves almost an inch of spare room. That's why elderly people, like my grandfather, are so much more prone to cerebral bleeding after a blow to the head. The brain actually rattles around inside. And these are just a few of the descriptions. Now, you probably are well aware that a lot of research is being conducted to try and extend healthspan and to prevent aging, the period of life free from disease. But the reality is the number of people with multiple morbidities is still expected to increase in the coming years. And along with this loss of function, comes with it loss of independence. And with that, as Atul describes, the experience of advanced aging and death has shifted to hospitals and nursing homes. And so with loss of independence during aging comes dependence on others. And who will that be? And so this brings us on to the second key point I want you to take from this book, which is who will look after the elderly? Now, one answer are geriatricians, doctors who are specialised in the healthcare of elderly people. However, as Atul describes, the number of certified geriatricians has fallen in the US by 25% between 1996 and 2010. Instead, doctors prefer to specialise in radiology and plastic surgery, partly because of the low pay associated with geriatricians, along with the fact that a lot of doctors don't like looking after elderly. And here Atul describes a conversation with his friend Felix Silverstone, who is a geriatrician, and he says that with the elderly, they don't just have a chief complaint, they have 15 chief complaints. How in the world are you going to cope with all of them? You're overwhelmed. Besides, he's had a number of these things for 50 years or so. You're not going to cure something he's had for 50 years. He has high blood pressure, he has diabetes, he has arthritis. There's nothing glamorous about taking care of any of these things. And so Atul addresses this problem well, but there doesn't necessarily seem to be any easy answers. Instead, he goes on to talk about alternative options, such as nursing homes and assisted living. And so this now introduces us to Dr. Bill Thomas, and the third take-home that I want to talk about, which is regaining independence. And so Bill Thomas's experience began in the early 1990s when he got a new job as medical director of Chase Memorial Nursing Home in New York. And he identifies that there are 3 plagues of nursing home existence: boredom, loneliness, and helplessness. And so Bill decided that he wanted to do something about this. So he introduced dogs, cats, rabbits, hens, plants, and children all to the nursing home. And they found in a study that over 2 years, the number of prescriptions required per resident fell to half that of the control nursing home. The total drug costs fell to just 38% of the comparison facility, and deaths fell by 15%. So why did that happen? Well, Thomas said, "I believe the difference in death rates can be traced to the fundamental human need for a reason to live," and goes along with Thomas's belief that a good life was one of maximum independence, which is exactly what his changes were trying to achieve. In place of boredom, they offer spontaneity. In place of loneliness, they offer companionship. And in place of helplessness, they offer a chance to take care of another being. And all of this for Thomas was just a starting point for a larger programme named Eden Alternative, which over the last 20 or so years has deinstitutionalised nursing homes and also resulted in the so-called greenhouse project. And greenhouses, not like the way you grow your plants, in this respect are small and communal with a physical environment made to preserve quality of life, self-sufficiency, privacy and dignity, and would host no more than 12 residents each. And if you're like me and like TED Talks, then there's a TED Talk given by Dr. Bill Thomas on YouTube that I'll link here for you to check out. And so shifting slightly into the fourth take-home from this book, it focuses more about alleviating suffering for patients and the importance of end-of-life discussions with the doctor and the important roles that a doctor plays in this discussion. And so obviously Atul is a doctor, whereas I'm not. But even reading this, I think it's important to understand the framework in which doctors address questions to patients, as it will likely affect all of us at some point, if not already. And so Atul references a 1992 paper that he was assigned to read during medical school that was written by two medical ethicists, Ezekiel and Linda Emanuel. And this paper was all about the different kinds of relationships that Atul, as a budding new clinician, might have with patients. And asks the question, what should the ideal physician-patient relationship be? And so in this book, Atul describes three of these relationships. The first one is paternalistic. And this is the doctor that we read about from the 50s, the all-knowing, godlike figure that tells the patients what they should do and does not discuss options that the doctor does not think are optimal. And although often denounced, it remains a common mode, especially with vulnerable patients, the frail, the poor, the elderly, and anyone who tends to do what they're told. The second type of relationship that Atul mentions is the informative doctor. And in many ways, this is the complete opposite of the paternalistic relationship. Here, the doctor informs the patient of the facts and figures needed to figure out the best option and then lets the patient make the decision. And so, as Atul says, in truth, neither type is quite what people desire. We want information and control, but we also want guidance. And so the Emanuels in this paper describe a third type of doctor-patient relationship, which they called interpretive, which is where the doctor's role is to help patients determine what they want. Interpretive doctors ask, what is most important to you? What are your worries? Then, when they know your answers, they will tell you about the different options and which one would most help you achieve your priorities. And so Atul emphasises in this book the importance of asking patients what matters most to them. And to quote from the book, if end-of-life discussions were an experimental drug, the FDA would approve it. And so the last take-home that I want to mention is that we are all elders in the making. And so throughout this book, Atul describes his own personal experience with his relationship with his father, who was suffering with spinal cord tumour. And so here Atul had to use the lessons that he'd learned to help his father. And whilst they made some good decisions and also some potential mistakes, by asking his father what were his priorities, by the end of the chapter, his father is in hospice and living a surprisingly full life. However, sadly, Atul's father's life did come to an end. But Atul describes that we were lucky to get to hear him tell us his wishes and say his goodbyes. And having a chance to do so, he let us know he was at peace. That let us be at peace too. And so all in all, being mortal is about the struggle to cope with the constraints of our biology. And I feel lucky that I've not really had to deal firsthand with some of the issues discussed in this book. But I feel like it has better prepared me for when those times will inevitably come. And whilst this book probably will resonate a lot with doctors who deal with patients daily, and may make them think differently about the questions they ask their patients and the decisions they make, I feel this book will ultimately resonate with everyone, since we are all elders in the making. And so I know that this is a bit different to my usual videos, but I finished reading the book and felt like I wanted to talk about it. And so I know that some of you will probably have your own viewpoints and opinions as well, and I'll be interested to hear them. I think that it's something we need to talk about more often and shouldn't be afraid to talk about it, since inevitably the demographics are changing and it will affect our lives more and more in the future. And so with that, I want to give a thank out to my Patreon supporters, who I'm incredibly grateful for. And I hope you've learned something in this video, and thanks for listening.